Hi, I'm Suzy Rhoades with PassMasters. For this week's Student Questions of the Week, we're going to cover fixed income securities. This topic appears on the SIE, Series 6, Series 7, Series 65, and Series 66. Let's see what are this week's questions. What is bearer form of a bond? Bearer form was back in the old days when you actually physically had a bond in your possession. You were the bearer of the bond. Whoever had the bond in their possession would receive the coupon payment and at maturity would receive par value. Today, we don't have bearer bonds. Today, our bonds are all book entry, so electronic record keeping of bonds today. Many corporate bonds are callable. Does that mean that government bonds and Fannie Mae, Ginnie Mae never have a callable feature? Corporate bonds are generally callable. Granted, if the bond indenture doesn't say it's a callable bond, then it is not callable. U.S. government bonds, U.S. government notes, they're generally not callable. Agency issues, so Fannie Mae and Ginnie Mae, would have the ability to be callable bonds. So if the bond is callable, it's going to describe it as such in the exam question. So the default is it's not callable unless it says that it is a callable bond. A zero coupon has no coupon. Did it ever have a coupon? How is a coupon sold off a bond? At issue or after or both? So a zero coupon has no coupon. Did it ever have a coupon? It did. How is a coupon sold off? I wouldn't necessarily say that the coupon is sold off. I would say that the par value is sold off. At issue or after or both. Federal agencies, municipalities, financial institutions, and corporations issue zero coupon bonds. So this would be a bond with no coupons. So a bond that has no coupon, no interest payments. One of the most popular zeros goes by the name of STRIP. STRIPS stands for Separate Trading of Registered Interest and Principal. A financial institution, government securities broker, or government securities dealer can convert an eligible treasury security into a STRIP bond. As the name implies, interest is stripped from the bond. So the question from the student was, are they at issue zero coupons? Sometimes. And sometimes they are created by the actual stripping of the U.S. government bond. Its principal is sold as a zero coupon. And then maybe the broker-dealer keeps the interest payments or can sell those interest payments to a different investor. So zero coupon bonds may be originally issued that way or may be created. U.S. broker-dealers have permission of the federal government to create strips. Zero coupon bonds have no coupon, no annual interest, but do they accrue interest? Yes. So I think it would be helpful here to look at an example. Let's say that today you bought for $3,500 a zero coupon bond. The zero coupon bond is maturing in 20 years, and in 20 years will pay a face amount of $10,000. What do you get for semi-annual interest? Anything? No. Why? Because it is a zero coupon bond. But when you hold the bond to maturity, the difference between what you pay today and what it's worth at maturity in 20 years, the difference is $6,500. Agree? Always use your calculator if you don't trust me. I don't trust me half the time, I promise. Now, how many years do we have until we get that $6,500? 20 years. So if you take this accrued interest, so we have 65, handy dandy non-programmable calculator always nearby, 6,500 divided by 20 years, we have $325 in taxable interest income each year. So this is sometimes referred to as phantom income because you're not really getting any income. So $325 in taxable interest income a year. So zero coupons are taxed as the interest accrues. So that when you have this bond at maturity, you've paid the taxes owed on the accrued interest. So you actually don't owe any long-term capital gains at maturity. The IRS won because they would rather you pay taxes as ordinary income, interest income as ordinary income, than had a long-term capital gain. So zero coupon bonds are great for someone who has, just had a baby and wants to save money for the kid to go to college when they're 20. This would be a good example for this bond. Granted, 10 grand is not going to get you through college, but maybe a year of school. Maybe, depends on your state, I guess. So that's how the zero coupon bond works. What is the difference or relationship between coupon rate and nominal yield of a bond? They are the exact same thing. So I often tell the story about the family that just moved into my neighborhood. They're from New York. They have 3 kids born in New York. The kids were born in New York. Does that ever change? No. The nominal yield on a bond, think of it like a tattoo on my chest. It's not going away. Nominal yield, coupon rate, same thing. It describes the bond's annual interest income. We know bonds pay interest semi-annually, so you have to divide that number by 2 to figure out the semi-annual interest payments. The coupon rate, the nominal yield, is reflective of interest rates at the time the bond was issued. The coupon rate, the nominal yield, never changes. Yield to maturity equals interest to maturity plus par? Not quite. Or no par? I don't know. Let's see. Let's look at an example of this type of a math formula. Granted, these aren't math formula tests per se, but with this question, I think understanding some math will be very helpful. So here we are with the Bonds family. They have their 3 kids. The nominal yield on the bond, the kids are born in New York, it never changes. On one side, we have the oldest boy. His name is Price. And on the other side, we have yield and rate. So interest rates, the twins, yield and rate. Interest rates drive the teeter-totter with this inverse relationship. If interest rates go up versus the nominal yield, the price of the bond in the secondary market will go down. If interest rates go down versus the nominal yield, the price of the bond in the secondary market will go up. Yield stands for 3 different yields: current yield, yield to maturity, and yield to call. So if we buy the bond when the bond is brand new and we pay par value, the bond has a 10% nominal yield. The formula for current yield is annual interest divided by current market price. The annual interest, so here's the formula: current yield, annual interest 10%, $100 divided by current market price. You bought the bond at par. Current yield is 10%. Yield to maturity, because you bought the bond at par, yield to maturity is going to be 10% as well. So there is no difference between what you paid and what you're going to get at maturity. Yield to call would also be 10%. So when you buy a bond at par value, all of the yields are equal. Nominal yield is equal to current yield, equal to yield to maturity, equal to yield to call. Granted, it's not very likely if you're buying the bond in the secondary market that you're going to buy a bond at par. The closer the bond is to maturity, the closer the bond's market price will be to par. But let's look at an example of a bond that is trading for more than par. So this bond is trading at a premium because interest rates have gone down, yes. And now we have current yield, yield to maturity, and yield to call. This bond matures in 20 years. What is the current yield? Well, what you get divided by what you pay. What do you get? Did what you get for the bond change? No, we're using this same bond. So you're still going to receive $100. You just had to pay more to get the $100. So what does that tell you about current yield? Is it going to be more or less than 10%? It's going to be less. $100 divided by $1,200. Well, let's see. $100 divided by 1,200 equals 8.3%. So this bond's current yield is 8.3%. Yield to maturity, is it going to be more or less than the current yield? It's going to be less than. Why? Well, the teeter-totter does not lie. But you want to understand it? All right. So that kind of goes back to what the student's question was. What are we looking at to determine yield to maturity? So what we have to do yield to maturity is we're going to take the annual interest income. So that's the $100. And because we paid more than par value for this bond, we're going to subtract out the difference between what was paid, $1,200, and what will be received, $1,000, when in 20 years. So we have $200 divided by how many years to maturity. So in my talking to you, I told you that this was a 20-year bond, but there I wrote it down for you. So we have 200 divided by 20. So we're going to subtract, we're going to write that down by an annual amount, $10. So if this bond was maturing in only 10 years, then it would have been minus $20. So $100 minus the difference between what was paid and what it's worth at maturity. So if you'd have purchased it at a discount, then you would have added the difference between what was paid and what it's worth at maturity. So here we have $90 over $1,200. So what did we say yield to maturity was going to be? More or less than current yield. We said less. Let's check the math. 90 divided by $1,200. 7.5%. So 7.5%. Yes. I'll put it up here by the formula as well. 7.5%. So that's how you determine the yield to maturity. You take the annual interest plus or minus the difference between what was paid and what it's worth at maturity. So yield to call. When you buy a bond in the secondary market at a premium, yield to call is going to be the worst yield, called yield to worst. So let's just make something up. Let's say that the bond is callable in 10 years. So how does that change our formula? So it's very similar to the yield to maturity formula. We're still going to have this annual interest. So in this case, we still have the $100. But now, how long do we have to wait to get back $200 less than we paid for the bond? The worst case scenario would be that it is called in 10 years. So we'd take the $200 divided by 10, and that's $20. So 100 minus $20, $80 over 1,200, better be less than 7.5. Let's check it out. 80 divided by $1,200, 6.66666, we'll say 6.67. Ta-da! So hopefully that is helpful. I know this can be a really challenging concept. So take the teeter-totter with you in your brain, write it down in your scratch paper when you log into the time of your test. It will prove to be very helpful. Our last question for this week: for a bond trading at a premium, what would the yield to call be if the date a bond could theoretically be called has passed? That's a good question. Let's go back to our messy whiteboard. So when we did this yield to call, it's a very valid point that the bond does not always get called as soon as it could get called. So an issuer has a choice as to whether or not they call a bond, and they're only going to call a bond if interest rates have gone down enough that it makes sense to refinance the debt. So just because the bond can be called in 10 years does not mean that it is called in 10 years. So let's say that we are 12 years into that bond. What is the bond's yield to call going to be? Is it going to be worse or better than this yield to worst formula that we figured out? It's actually going to be better or higher. So if you think about it, the worst case scenario in this example is that the bond is called in 10 years. The longer you wait, right? When we did yield to maturity, we had 20 years till maturity. So the longer you have until you get back the $200 less than you paid for the bond in this example, the higher the yield will be. So if the bond has not been called, the yield to call will be higher than the yield to worst. The yield to call will be higher than the yield to worst. It won't be higher than yield to maturity. You never know when a bond is going to be called. That's a good point. So when we always say for the test, when you're looking at a bond trading in the secondary market at a premium, the most important yield for the investor to consider is yield to call. It's called at that point yield to worst because that's the worst case scenario. That does not mean that's what's going to happen. It is perfectly possible that 15 years in, then the bond is called. So what's the yield going to be then? Well, it's going to be somewhere in between 7.5 and 6.67. You could do all the math and figure it out exactly, but the test does like this conceptually. And I already showed you how to do the math. Those were some great fixed income securities questions. Give this video a thumbs up if you learned something. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn those notifications on. If you have any questions at all about this video or anything in general, just ask me in the comments below. If you'd like to check out PassMasters course offerings or to enroll in any of our programs, there is a link found in this video's description. Thank you so much for watching. Keep up the good work. Happy studies. Study. Study, study, pass!